sorry for starting this late. Yeah, for those who don't know Geoff Lee, probably you all know him. Yeah, that's why you are here. But Geoff is one of our PG students, and he's working mostly on Roman history, but he's particularly interested, as you have noticed already, in Roman military history and in Caesar, in his character, in his amazing deeds, and in the period. It's a very, very, very exciting period of the history of ancient Rome. And you also said once that you even dreamed. You had a dream in which Caesar appeared.
Kyle told me to take a holiday.
Cannot be good. Cannot be good. So this is really, really worrying, Geoff. Yeah,
well, I did. I dreamt about Caesar. And we were walking along a quay together with the waves crashing.
Okay.
And he said he would be back again, but he hasn't been. So I've been left on my own with this.
So let's not interpret it in a Freudian way, yeah, because it could be very worrying for you. Yeah. So let me say that we are really proud and really happy that one of our PG students is going to present a research seminar, and seeing how many people have turned up and have come to listen to Geoff, I also use a chance to welcome you again and again during our series that has started already 2 weeks ago and will go on until Christmas. And we will have a new series of research seminars in the second term. You are also very welcome to propose us ideas to present here in this. So this is, as you see, it looks like a very formal place where very important professors come and present papers, but it is also a place where young people, more or less experienced people, can just present their work in progress, or their MAs, dissertations, or whatever you consider it's worth to present it in public and to discuss it in public. So really, we are welcome to listen to your suggestions or whatever you would like to do. Yeah. Okay. So having said that, I leave now Geoff all alone to speak about his research seminar. Should I cut you if you speak too much?
Well, I'm going to try and go for 30 minutes, but I've got 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I was trying to do is just generally introduce this in the hope that Aldo comes along with more resources, or should I get going straight away?
I think you should start straight away, because otherwise it will be too long, and for those of you who still don't have the handout, there will be some more handouts coming. Okay? And after the speech there are some drinks, please stay. Okay? Thank you very much.
Try this, Martin.
Oh, no, I tell what you prefer.
Now, that introduction, because Marta taught me the module on Caesar, and I'd suggest now, Marta, you're much more into Caesar than you were, which I think is good.
Well, yeah, I try.
Yeah, which is good, it's good. So we can grow on you. Okay, so 3 parts. It's basically the landing and the difficulties a general commander would face landing, a general commander would face trying to prevent that landing. That's one of the things I'm going to do. Then we're going to get on to some Latin. Okay? And it's basically where when you read many translations, there's lots of leaping going on. Okay? And I'm arguing against the translation. So they're saying in certain circumstances people are leaping off horses and leaping from boats into the sea, which I don't think is very likely. But I'm going to go through the Latin, and my Latin's not perfect, so anything you see would be very gratefully received, because if I submit this, I'd rather be getting it right, which is good. Now, and I'm unlikely to get there, but right at the end, there is a section on oratory and rhetoric, with things like polysyndeton and assonance and things like that, which is what Romans, elite Romans, were trained to do. But we're unlikely to get there if I'm going to stick to the 30 minutes. So, if I can start then, as you get your handouts, the first thing you see is a map. And it's a map of part of the Normandy coastline. Now, what we have here is a planned invasion by the Allies into the Axis or Nazi-held France, Europe. Okay? So the first thing I've got here as evidence is a heading misinformation. Montgomery was brought back from the desert to take over an army group that was going to take part in the invasion, and he knew it was Normandy, and he said to the RAF, "Why are you flying over Normandy?" And they said, "Well, that's where you're going to land. We want to take some pictures for you." And he said, "Don't fly over Normandy. We don't want them to know." So the RAF said, "Okay then, we'll fly over some other places as well." So we're on the start of what you could call, in the industry, a double D. It's denial and it's deception. And what's going on here is deception. You're trying, by your use of intelligence gathering, to let the enemy think you're concentrating on another area. Okay? And Montgomery was immediately on the case, took command and told them not to do that. The interesting thing about this map is Cherbourg here was a port. It wasn't a big port, but the Allies didn't go for it straight away. They avoided it. That's something to bear in mind for later on, but it's worth pointing out now. If we go to the next section, we've got von Rundstedt, who was a field marshal in the German army, and he had overall command of France, basically, certainly the coastline. Now, von Rundstedt basically thought that the invasion that the Allies would put forward was going to take place in the Pas de Calais, which is the shortest distance, as most people know. But he also thought, rather than protect the whole coastline, even there, he'd be better off having what they call a mobile reserve. Let them land. Once we know where they are, we'll go for them. Okay? Right. Other generals thought other things. Jodl, who was a famous tank commander type general, thought Normandy. So did that Bavarian guy, Adolf Hitler. But they sort of ignored him because they thought he was a jumped up little corporal. What does he know? Well, he got it right, actually. Okay. Von Rundstedt we know about, and he told us about Jodl and other people because he's actually interrogated by this guy Luce, who I've quoted. Okay. Ambrose tells us Hitler guessed correctly. Now, when you think about Adolf Hitler, he had 51 divisions in France, and he was the governor. He was the boss. So, basically, he had overall control. We're going to talk about a part of the British Isles that we call it British Isles, we can call it Britain, and I will, and I'll call them the Britons, but they didn't think of themselves that way. Just the coastline of Kent had 4 kingdoms on it, according to Caesar the next year. So if Hitler, with 51 divisions and a bad temper, couldn't decide where to put his army, couldn't get them all working the same way, 4 kings, chieftain-type kings in Kent, if they were capable of working together, still had a problem of overall command. If they didn't have the ability to work together, then Caesar's odds against him were massively reduced. Okay? That's why I'm pointing these things out. So I'm using this analogue of the Second World War. And I've got some Latin there at the bottom of page 1. And this is where Caesar basically tells us there were 4 kingdoms in Kent, and they had 4 kings. Okay. Right. The translation for that is, while these events were proceeding thereabout, Cassiolvanus sent messages to Kent, the country by the sea, as above set forth, over whose 4 districts, Cingetorix, Carvilius, Taximagalos, and Segovax, ruled as kings. Okay. We've talked about von Rundstedt wanted a large reserve. The other famous guy was Rommel, who wanted to defend the whole coastline. These are experienced generals. They knew their jobs, but they couldn't agree on the way to defend a coastline. Okay, and Ambrose tells us, basically, the case for Ike was hopeless unless he could attack where he was not expected to attack. Deception. Okay. Then we're going to go on to the Armada, which is quite good, actually. In the opinion of many experts, the Isle of Wight was the most likely target for the Armada. King Philip had decreed the Kent side of the Thames estuary as the principal goal, but the Isle of Wight had indeed been selected as a secondary objective. So on the British side, or the English side under Elizabeth, they thought, we think it's the Isle of Wight. Philip had said, we'll do the Isle of Wight only if we can't get Kent, and we can't get on the coast. Hi, Jane. Right, So to guard the entire coastline was an absolute impossibility. But what they actually did, they had militia, and they used to call them trained bands, and most of them weren't trained. But if you had Hampshire that was on the coast, as soon as they spotted the Armada, they would send runners to Wiltshire, and Wiltshire would send their armed band down to Hampshire. And the idea then was, if they landed, that was unlucky for you, you had to try and hold them. But if they moved to the next county, you'd follow along the cliff tops, Wiltshire would come down, they'd be told where to go. So that was the English approach to trying to protect the coastline. Now the reason I'm doing all this is I'm just trying to show you how difficult it is to get this one right, unless you know exactly where they're going to land. Okay, so we're talking about Caesar planning this, because I'm saying it was a success what he did. The Romans themselves had experience presenting the coastline a couple hundred years before Caesar, and Livy tells us about it. There were pirate raids and there were invasions. Okay, so we've got some evidence here from Livy. And what he's saying is, the sea was infested by fleets of Greek pirates who made descents on the coast around Antium and Laurentum. They entered the mouth of the Tiber. Leaving 2 legions to protect the city, the consul divided the remaining 8 between himself and the praetor. He kept conduct of the war against the Gauls in his own hands. The Gauls were on land. And then, to rush on, the praetor was to protect the coastline and prevent the Greeks from effecting a landing. And the Greeks, they were no fighters on land. The Romans could not fight on sea. Ultimately, as they prevented them from landing anywhere and prevented access to water and other necessities of life, the Greeks abandoned Italy. They couldn't land. So the Romans had experience. Now, although that was a long time before Caesar, when Caesar went to school, there were 4 different types of school, and part of the training was what happened in the past. They had Homer, they had the Iliad, they had all their battles, and this was your elite lads' education, warfare, the tricky stuff, why we should be proud of ourselves, what we did with the Greeks, what we did with the barbarians. So he had this knowledge, that's what I'm suggesting to you. And then afterwards, after 80 BC, the pirates of Cilicia, encouraged by Mithridates and by the generally disturbed conditions in the Mediterranean, extended their raids farther and farther west, and in 70 to 68 ravaged the shores of Italy itself, carrying off 2 praetors from the Appian Way, which I find very funny. But there you go. So they landed, they wandered sort of part way into the middle of Italy, grabbed a couple of important magistrates, took them back on a boat and sailed off. So these people knew what it was like for an invasion to come. Hello, welcome. For these sort of raids to take place. So they understood the coastline was hard to defend. And then the Gabian law gave Pompey permission to form a fleet and go and chase the pirates down. Okay, an active defence. So passive defence, and these are from Starr, who's done a bit of research into the Imperial Navy. But passive defence is guarding the coastline. You guard the harbours, you put colonies where there's natural harbours, you build a fort. So you protect that area. Okay? It's difficult to protect the other areas. One of the ways they did do it, though, in parts of Italy, was to build a city 5 or 6 miles back from the shore. That was one of the approaches they did. Okay? Active is go looking for them on the sea and go and attack them where they are. Okay, so that's a bit of background to the knowledge Caesar would have had. So here, we have this map here, and we have Thanet. This is quite important, because now if you look at Britain, the Isle of Thanet isn't an island. Richborough, here, is not on the coast. But this is what is believed to have been the condition round about 55 BC. Now, I'm starting to talk in roundabouts, maybes and possiblies, because the actual fact is we don't know the condition totally of the coastline at that time. Some people think they do. Okay? Right now. So what we're going to get onto now is Caesar's invasion. He's in Gaul, he's got his fleet built, and he's setting off for Britain. So I've jumped over many, many things there, but these are critical things for me. Now, Caesar wrote about a lot of this in his commentaries. Okay, but there's a particular piece of evidence here from Cassius Dio, and I think he encapsulates quite well what he thinks Caesar did. He's telling us he made the passage with the infantry by the most desirable course, but did not select the best landing place. For the Britons, apprised beforehand of his voyage, had secured all the landings on the coast facing the mainland. Accordingly, he sailed around a certain projecting headland, coasted along the other side of it, and disembarking there in the shoals, conquered those who joined battle with him, and gained a footing on dry land before more numerous assistance could come, after which he repulsed this attack also. Not many of the barbarians fell, for their forces consisted of chariot drivers and cavalry, so they easily escaped the Romans, whose cavalry had not arrived yet. Okay. Grange believes that basically what we're talking about here is a campaign that becomes a catalogue of misfortunes and near disasters. And he's saying all would not have been lost if Volusenus identified the natural haven of the Wonsum, which is this channel between Thanet that I've just shown you. Now what Grange is doing, and what Grange has done with many of these arguments, he was a firm believer in this, he just didn't find Richborough. That is what this is about. So what Grange has now done is open it up and said, if only Volusenus had found Wonsum. And basically, Grange and many other experts are arguing from silence, because we don't really know. Volusenus was sent by Caesar. He did a 4-day mission off the coast of Britain to do what Caesar fondly calls a general reconnaissance. Well, I was in the army and I did reconnaissances, and they don't just say to you, go out there and have a look around and come back and tell me what you see. They tend to tell you, get some idea, count the tanks, how much food have they got, or something. But this is all we have. That's all we know about Volusenus. And he came back 5 days later and told Caesar what he saw. That's it. That's what we know. That's what everybody knows. So now some people are working from silence. They say, well, obviously he was told to go and find a harbour suitable for 200 ships to land an invasion force and all this. Well, I don't agree with that, and I don't think you would, because we've just heard that most people defend the harbours and the obvious places. So why go and look for the obvious places? You can pretend you're looking at them. You can make the people who are defending them think, oh, we're right, they're going to come here, which is all fantastic. And that's the other part, that's deception again, double D. Okay, so Grange is saying he didn't find a Wonsum, he's generalised it. We don't actually know whether he found the Wonsum or not. We don't know if Caesar knew about it. But Caesar, I'm suggesting as a competent general, may have said, that's too obvious a place, it's too good a place to land, they'll have an idea we're going there. We can encourage them to go there, because when we land, we'll have less people to face. Because the guy's a general, and that's what generals do. It's an important concept that if you're not in overall command, you don't see this. But generals play with each other, you've got reserves, you've got people here, and they do feints and they do all sorts of things to try and get the other general to send his troops the wrong way, then they jump in there and they get an easy time of it. That's what they used to do all through warfare. Armies would be on the go for weeks just trying to reposition and go somewhere. Alexander the Great was fantastic because he just didn't play. He had it worked out, I'm going that way, and off he did. Okay? Caesar was very similar. Okay, so Grange is telling us this. This is how he's trying to cover all the sources. And you have a lot of arguments saying, you know, Caesar would have used Richborough if Volusenus had found it. So that's it. Volusenus couldn't have found it because Caesar didn't use Richborough. He should have used Richborough because Claudius used it. Now that was a strongly held view, but nowadays not everybody agrees with that. There's a lot of archaeologists who say it's quite possible that Claudius landed at Fishbourne, just up the Solent from the Isle of Wight. So these experts who are saying should have used Richborough like Claudius did, actually haven't got their evidence right, because we don't have evidence that Claudius landed in Richborough. We also don't have evidence that Richborough was a harbour in Caesar's time. Even if it was in Claudius's time, it's 100 years later. So, and we've got here Martin Bates, who's done some work in the area and taken core samples that haven't yet been checked. but we actually don't have any evidence to say Richborough was a harbour, and we have no evidence to say it wasn't a harbour in 55 BC. So a lot of the experts are arguing with evidence that is now, the best way of putting it is dated, and it's not necessarily correct. Okay, what we have here then, just check the time. Oh, blimey. Okay, we have a list. I've got a list here of 7 points. And they're sort of what I consider critical points on Caesar's landing. He had landfall at 9 AM in the morning. He waited for 6 hours while the rest of the flotilla, caught up with him. Okay? He only had to face chariots and cavalry when he landed. The legionaries who were getting off the ships were struggling in the water, and it gets quite dramatic. That's one of the reasons we were trying the shield. Because of this struggle, he got his warships to come back from the bunch and go to the side, the flank. Okay? And I'm suggesting that they beached the boats. He built up his mass on the flank, which is what I'm suggesting now. It's not necessarily what he's saying. He's saying when the men got a foothold and they charged, we drove the Britons off. Okay? I'm suggesting this foothold was on the flank and they built up a mass there. And he couldn't follow up because he didn't have his cavalry. Okay, landfall. This is Caesar, this is a translation of Caesar. He himself reached Britain about the 4th hour of the day, and there beheld the armed forces of the enemy displayed on all the cliffs. They were waiting for him. They were stood on the cliffs, and the people who were used to fighting were a bit worried because they thought, they'll throw spears at me from on those cliffs. I'm a goner. They're going to hurt. They're going to go through 2 of us at once. These are the things I believe would be going through people's minds, as well as the spears. Okay, right. But I think this is really clever. He got there, they were waiting for him. Brilliant. So I'm suggesting the deception worked. I think also now we bring in the denial, because I believe Caesar knew there were other landing sites, and he was clever enough to have done his research. Okay. So he waits there for 5 or 6 hours while the rest of the ships come and join him at the same place. So I'm now going to suggest to you that the commander on the coast was saying to himself, what do I do with my reserves? I've got all these other places, these good places covered. The guy's here. Look, other ships are joining him. Hour after hour, there's more and more of them coming. So you can just imagine, this guy's in a bit of a quandary. What does he do? Does he call everybody from the other places? Does he get his reserves in? This is where they're going to go, lads. Or what? So it's a moot point what he did. Okay? Anyway, so what we actually have then, the remainder of the flotilla arrives over the next 5 hours, and then Caesar quite handily tells us, thinking this place to be by no means suitable for disembarkation, he waited at anchor till the 9th hour for the rest of the flotilla to assemble there, and meanwhile he summoned together the lieutenant generals and the tribunes to inform them what he had learnt from Volusenus. It's very tantalising, but we still don't know what Volusenus told him and what he then decided to tell the generals. And a general sends out intelligence gatherers all the time. Sometimes you wouldn't even know, if you were gathering intelligence, that the guy next to you was gathering intelligence, because they don't actually tell you all this stuff. You get tasked, you go out and do it. You don't talk about it, you tell the guy who's tasked you, they make a decision, they collate the information, and they decide based on that. It's best if you don't know half the time, and it's best if you keep your mouth shut about what you told the general. And it seems like Volusenus did just that, because nobody really knows what he told Caesar. Okay? But we know that whatever it was worth, some of it was worth telling to the generals in the boats. At a very busy time, you didn't say, come on my boat, I'm going to tell you a story, it's sort of really cool. What you did, you got on the boat to tell them the important stuff, you've got to react, it's got to be snappy, you've got to do a good job. Right. I'm suggesting, when Volusenus went over, he tried out the approach Caesar was going to follow. You get your boats by a promontory and you stay there. The tide off Dover changes every 6¼ hours. It goes in a totally different direction. It's going down that way for 6¼ hours, then it changes and it goes that way for 6¼ hours, at least now. We don't know what the coastline was like then. We think it was doing the same sort of thing, but we don't exactly know how. Now we can get it very accurately. So if you turn to page 6, I've tried to do a couple of Admiralty maps there from range, and you'll just see this is how it is. That's normally 12 knots in places, averaging 12 knots. Okay, so if Caesar got into a promontory when that was going, he would have 5 or 6 hours, quite cleverly, to wait for the tide to change. So it's quite possible that's what he was intending to do, because it is quite clever. The map above it, I think, is pretty good, because if you consider this bit as a promontory, you're waiting there. The commander here has these points covered, and I've drawn here the mileage. Average infantry marching rates at this time, 2¼ miles an hour. That's guys with shields, which most of you tried, or the equivalent. The Gallic shield was not the same as that. But they had weapons, they had this, plus hormones are charging around, they're going to move quick. They've got plenty of time to get there, they're probably going to be tired when they get there. As a lot of them get there and leave these places undefended, the Romans weigh anchor, go around there, and go as fast as they can for that place. So the troops who are here can't keep up. They've got further distance to go than the ships. Okay? Now, I haven't had time or room, but there are parts of the coastline that Holmes thinks looked quite a bit like this. Romney Marshes in the old days, he thinks looked like this. Okay, so I'm saying to you, this was planned, it was clever stuff. Caesar got there with the whole idea of wrong footing the enemy. That was his intention. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a confusion. He did it to achieve that result. What generals do, commit your men in the wrong place, I attack there. That's my contention. Okay, let's see what we're getting. Only a few minutes left for the 30. I've got 40, haven't I?
Yeah.
Yes, good. All right. So, the tide's changed. I'm suggesting, and many other people suggest, he got his boats out. He went for that, and as Dio says, and other people say, once the Britons realised what he was doing, they went that way. Now, the people who could keep up with him, the people who could sort of shadow the guy like they did for the Armada, were the chariots and the cavalry. But it's possible they weren't committed. It's possible they were back in reserve, waiting for blood to be on the beach before they were committed. Okay? Even so, massively reducing the people who were fighting him. It doesn't appear that the infantry got there at all, because there's no, well, Caesar's not writing about any slingers, any archers, or any javelineers on the beach, making it difficult for people to land. But he talks about the chariots charging around the place, the horses galloping up to the guys who got out of the transport ships, and they're trying to make it difficult for them to land. They're trying to kill them, actually, but they're trying to stop them from landing. My contention is, if there was enough of them, they'd have stopped them. I don't think there was many at all. The strength of cavalry is they can bump you a bit with the horse, really, and they're higher up than you are. But if you're in the water, up to there, as some people would suggest, then that means for them to get to you, as long as you're not near a higher piece, yeah, they have to come in the water to get you, so they lose momentum. The good thing about an infantry, once they lose momentum, if they're not in formation, you've got an infantryman, he may or may not have had this with him, but he's got his short sword, you come that way, they're good hands, this normally, they're like that. So they're going to come at you that way, you dodge under the horse's head, and you do the horse. And as they're going down, you get the guy on top. Well-known technique, that's what they used to do. In fact, some cavalry forces would charge up to each other and just get off their horses to fight on foot. So cavalry can be at quite a disadvantage at times. If you're a heavily armoured infantryman, you've got real advantages. The way the cavalry trooper has to get you is to lean over his weaker side, do that, he loses a lot of his strength, he loses a lot of the training on his arm, and he loses a lot of his range. So that is possibly what was happening in the sea. Perhaps wasn't as bad as it could be seen, we could think. Okay, we've got some evidence here from McGrail about the tides and the streams. McGrail, a well-respected, well-known archaeologist, a maritime archaeologist, and he's saying that basically prehistoric people and Gallic people could reckon the tides, tidal streams, phases of the moons, tracks and distances. And he thinks Julius Caesar or his navigator could have done the same. Okay? Right. Disembarkation was a matter of extreme difficulty. This is Caesar again. The ships, on account of their size, could not be run ashore except in deep water. The troops, though they did not know the ground, had not their hands free, and were loaded with the great and grievous weight of their arms. Nevertheless, at one and the same time, to leap down, which is what I wanted you all to try that for, from the vessels, to stand firm in the waves and to fight the enemy. This is great stuff. So you're stood on top of a ship. I walked from Will's house to here this afternoon or late morning, and it was windy. And this was going up in the air like that. And I thought, every time I've stood on a boat near the coastline, it has been windy. So before you even leap from the boat, you've got to control this thing. And you've got your helmet on, and you've got your sword, presumably, maybe a pilum, and you've got this thing going up there. And hopefully you're not hitting the centurion with it, because you'll pay. And then, we are now expected to believe that these guys leapt off the boat with this in their hand, over the side, into unknown ground. There could be rocks, there could be all sorts of stuff, into sand, which, if I remember rightly, especially if there's an undertow, seems to be pulled away from your feet a little bit. So I don't think they leapt off the boat with these things. They might have lowered themselves down over the side, and their mate might have passed this down to them, but then we're expected to believe they're up to there in water, they've got a cavalry trooper up there doing that. Well, I just find it hard to work out where this would be. Would it be in the water? Because they're not going to do much with that with the old waves going. Would it be up in the air like that? They're not really trained to do that. Would they be there like that? Which is what I'd probably do, like that. It's not necessarily an easy thing to work out. It's not necessarily easy for these guys. I wouldn't be surprised if they went in without the shields, although it sounds ridiculous. I think if they left the boat, they would have lowered themselves down, and these would have been passed to them later, if they were going to do it. I'm saying that because leaping sounds fantastic, you know, and you see it a lot of the time, but most commanders want their men not to rip their ankles apart, not to hurt their wrists. They want them there to do their job. It's a cold and calculated game, this warfare stuff, and these guys were used to doing it. I don't think they were leaping. So, but I've got a reason to sort of labour that point. Okay, what we get on to now is, you've got the guys jumping off in the water, it's a bit of a mess, there's cavalry around, there's lots of shouting going on. You've got guys parking their chariots up, they're running down to the coast, chucking a javelin. When they've got one left, they're trying to poke you. It's all quite messy, and it's not very pleasant, and it hurts, and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so Caesar then says to the warships, back off a little bit, and charge towards that beach. This is what Caesar loves doing. This is how he wins battles. He's impetus. He goes in really hard. Now he's got warships. And this is why I think Volusenus had this worked out for Caesar. Because I think, reading the Latin, it doesn't state beaching. I think they beached. I think they went for the beach. They went on, rammed the boats on there. We don't know how many they were. We get told by Caesar that the auxiliary were given the boats after all the infantry had got onto the transports. And the inference is, I believe, some of them got onto the warships as well. So the warships beach, you've got slingers, you've got archers. That is what I used to call, or we used to call, dead ground. That's ground you've got covered. Anything goes in there, it's dead. You hit it with everything you've got. So you've got slingers with lead bullets. You've got Cretan and Numidian archers with composite bows. Yep, they hurt. You've got ballistas. Yeah, so they could fire double javelins on some of the boats. Don't know how many. Okay, so you've got this covered, but some of those boats have legionaries on them. So I'm suggesting there that they could lower themselves down onto dry land, not the sea. They're beached. They could go to the front of the boat, they could lower themselves down, they could have these things, they could have their pylon, they could be set up like they're normally set up. They form a critical mass. The archers, the slingers can come down, they can cover the flanks, and then they start to move across the beach. Because what Caesar tells us is they come in on the open flank. That's my open flank. My shield is here. If I've got an enemy there, that's where my shield is. This side's open. So if somebody can get around there and start chucking stuff at me or poking me with a spear, I've got a bit of a problem. So I'm defending against that guy, and I'm doing this stuff. If I do that, my back's open to the enemy in the front. So Caesar put his boats in on the Britons' open flank. So their shields were there, they're on their horses or their chariots, they're fighting that way, so the ships went in that side. Okay? So they were more open to the missiles that were being thrown at them. They backed off a little bit. Okay? Haven't seen anybody else say this, but I'm then saying with the ships, you had almost 5 or 6 pillboxes, however many they were, very difficult to get at, dead ground, you could form up and you could move across the beach. Any guy struggling in the water could join you or get off, and the guys fighting them had a choice. They either stayed fighting them or they got cut off. Okay? And what Caesar said is as soon as the men got a firm footing, they charged, the Britons were routed, and everybody got onto the beach. Okay? So I'm saying it was a success. It was a success because of the planning that went into it. It was a success because Caesar used the knowledge that he gained in several different ways to position his fleet, to wrong-foot the enemy, to use the tide and the wind to sail up there quickly and plan his landing. And all Volossanus had to do, really, was to take some soundings. And they did it all the time. They had poles on the boats. And the guys, the seamen, knew how to do it. They would do it at an angle, but they'd know how deep everything was based on comparison with their hull. They could do that. They had lead weights. We've got it in the Bible, St. Paul. They used lead weights to take soundings. And Volossanus was in a warship with expert sailors. So they'd have said to him, look, you know, we do this, we do that, we should be at the beach on the left-hand side. So I'm suggesting that's what Volossanus did. Okay? Right. I hate to say this, and I love the sound of my own voice, but I do need to stop there, because I've been going for quite a while, I think.
Can do a conclusion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Conclusion. So, right, my first conclusion is I have a lot to learn about presenting a paper. Okay? Because I've got tons of this stuff, and I've done a third of it. So, thank you for letting me practice this and starting to learn what I hope to be is my trade. Okay, so the conclusion. Many experts say Caesar was lucky to get away with it. Grange does. He says it was a damn close run thing. Okay, I don't agree. I think it was planned, I think it worked just fine. Everything was just like all the other battles, you know. Nothing's perfect in warfare, nothing works perfectly. There'd hardly be any point doing it if it did. Okay, but the guy did his planning, he used what he had, he went there and he got back. His legionaries, most of them, got there and they got back. It was good planning. If you look at it the way I've presented it to you, using the evidence, but trying to fill in the gaps, which is what I think we do as historians, archaeologists, etc. We try and fit in the gaps. I'd say that a lot of the press Caesar's got, and Volossanus for that matter, has been very negative, and there's another way of viewing the evidence, which is much more positive. So I'd suggest that was the successful landing for Caesar. Okay? That's my conclusion done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. You've managed, even improvising a wonderful conclusion, so you are a good speaker, yeah?
Thank you.
Teach with heart. So, thank you very much. I would like to open the discussion if you have questions. Yeah.
About the point you made about the shields, about them not taking them into the water.
Yes.
And I was wondering about that, because surely the shape of the shield is rounded as well, which is it's very much very rounded, which means the waves would float around it a lot easier than going in with a flat board, certainly. And I still think they would have taken them in with them, because even if they're having to hold them in front of them and struggling to push through the waves, it's breaking around it, but it is still some protection. And especially against cavalry, because the way cavalry generally have to attack, if they have a hand weapon, is either like that as they go past, or like that, and that's a very weak stroke. And if they're wearing helmets anyway, they should be fairly protected against that. So if they're coming in like that to hit them as they come past, even if they can't move very fast, the shield should be some protection, and then they can just look round and just stab at the horse.
Yes. I don't think the cavalry were going past most of those legionaries. They may have been, if they were higher up, and the sand was there, because some people suggest it was steeply sloping shelf. They may have been up there when the legionary was down there. But many, many other cavalry people facing the Romans jumped off their horse anyway. They were shieldless. The Romans at Cannae did it. They jumped off. They didn't even have armour, the Romans at Cannae, and the Gauls and the Spaniards did. They jumped down because against cavalry you have an advantage as a lone infantryman against a lone cavalry. That's arguable. I do take your point. I can't work out, to be honest, if I would want the shield or not with the waves breaking. The way I've been told it from somebody who's a surfer is it's fine when you're out there and the waves are just rolling in, but when you see them going white and you hear the crash, that's where all the power comes. So the way I saw it, and I'm not saying I'm right, I think your point's as valid as my point, but you've got this, and I was thinking, before I was thinking, you've got the waves, you've got this, you've got to get your foot in right, you've got to be quite nimble to do your job. This guy, so Caesar tells us, is quite firm on his seat. Your only chance is to get that way, shielded or otherwise. The only way you stand any chance of evening up the inequalities in the ground. So you've got the waves breaking, and I thought that's going to be hard. You know, and there might be ways around it. You know, there could well be. I'm not a skilled user of the shield. But then when I walked over and the wind was there, and I just went, hang on a minute. Do you know what I mean? The wind's against you. You've got the waves going that way and this doing that. And you've got all the wind behind you, even worse. But I take your point. I mean, you know, if there's guys getting down in the water, you know, you could be doing that, you could be shielding your friend, you're doing that, one's got it up, one's got it down. Critically, I don't think they're going to line up and march in order. But I think it's a moot point. What I think is very strongly in your favour, which I am going to bring in, is the dishonour of losing a shield. So you had the Spartans, come with your shield or on it, son. Yeah. You had Scaevola, and we don't know when he did this. It's either the first landing or the second landing. Swam back to the ship after defending all the centurions, catching javelins, throwing them back, really having a tough time, swimming across to his boat, climbing out St. Caesar. I'm sorry I lost my shield, Governor. So there's a big thing about shields, which, you know, it's a valid point. Okay, how the cavalry combats took place, I would suggest some very strongly could be as you suggested. Some could have been as I suggested, and I think that's probably the truth.
Yeah, most personal. I think they certainly think they'd aim to get off the boat with their shield, but if they found it too difficult, they'll throw it aside.
Yeah, what do you think to my point then? Getting down into the water and your mate passing the shield, don't you?
Yeah, oh definitely, yeah. I can't see them leaping off the boat.
No, and that's good.
Not unless they parachute down.
Well, yeah. Yeah, exactly. But thank you for that, because if I write about this, and that's going to be marked, I need to see those angles, and it's marked by Mark. I need to see those angles and try and cover them. So thank you. That's exactly what I need.
Yeah. Not knowing much about this, but are there not other types of shield? Are you ready to that enormous thing, little things, all sorts of stuff which are useful in combat?
Yep, there are all sorts of shields.
Yeah.
That's a good point as well. I tried to think that one through.
Okay.
So you've got the Gallic shield, which was like more oblong shaped. You had auxiliary shields, which could be that shape, lighter, smaller. You had many choices. You had half shields. You had all sorts of things. But the way I looked at it was this. You train soldiers to fight. Okay. Now, the other thing about the shield, which you mentioned, you're trained to fight with this thing in combat, and you haven't got it, probably feel quite naked actually. Apart from the obvious, you might be getting hit by stuff, you're trained to do things a certain way. You go forward like that with your knee, with the scoop, and you stab with the sword. Without the shield, it's just not going to be right. Do you know what I mean? So, I think you've got a point. I'm suggesting they may have gone shieldless. Yeah, it's possible you may have dropped it in the water, if you could get over the dishonour thing. Because soldiers are like that. I know it's silly. You know, you're out there fighting for your life, trying to take somebody else's, and all these other bits of training pop in for a reason. These guys were trained hard for a reason. So it's a possibility there were other shields. It's a possibility they prepared. So if you get on to this, which I think is a point, Yeah? I'd say then, okay, you're saying these are the conditions, let's train, let's specialise for them. Then the guys probably oiled themselves down before they got to the border. They probably put lard right on the back of their neck. Because if you go down in the water and it's really cold, you can go unconscious. But if you've got cooking lard there, or fat, or tallow, you don't. It doesn't get to the hypothalamus. So you've got a point. I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. The one thing, heavily armoured, grievous weight of their arms, no mention of the shield. So I've picked on that, to be honest with you, as one issue. I don't know if they went over their pylon. You know, they might have just gone over with daggers for all I know, the sort of still in the scabbard. We can't tell, we don't know, but I think it's worth playing around with the ideas. That's another good point. Yeah.
I think one of the things to think about, the terrain that the chariots have been operating in, my knowledge of that particular area is that where you've got beaches you could possibly drive a boat up and beach it at Deal and places like that. The ground behind there is going to be low-lying, quite wet most of the year. So I think one has to think quite carefully about that stretch from St Margaret's, where the chalk comes in, up to Richborough, in terms of whether you could actually have, I mean, I don't know how wet the ground has to be before you stop a chariot operating, but certainly the back beach environments might not be the place where you could operate a chariot. So, I mean, I think you can sort of map those out to a certain extent by looking at the local geology and the topography, and you might be able to narrow things down a little bit more. And the other thing you might think about is that I don't know what the local vegetation was like there at the time being, and how much of that landscape was stripped of tree cover. But obviously, certain parts of that landscape are probably still forested, and there may be some information that combining that sort of topographical look at wet versus dry environments and wooded versus non-wooded environments, you might get a better sense of where chariots would have been able to operate in that landscape. So it's something worth thinking about.
Yeah, it's worth thinking about. There's been a bit of research into the chariots of the Celts, and it's quite good. They found some chariots in burials, and they've made some models, and they're quite almost flimsy. So I mean, you can go over rough ground, and based on what they found, and they reconstructed, yeah, the experimental, which is, I'm getting out of my depth a little bit, but the guy did it and he constructed this. He said, based on this, you can see how the Greeks in their hilly mountainous areas could have used these chariots. Okay, but you're right. And then we've also got a year later where Caesar gives us more information. So I'm not sure I'm going to say this properly, Cassialbanus, he had 2,000 chariots, and the way Caesar describes it is they were shadowing Caesar, and they would come out of the woods to attack when they could. Okay, but I think it's a valid point. So we've got the landing on the beach. What came next? How was the landing on the beach, or the contested landing on the beach, affected by the topography of the area? Which, working back from that, may help us in the future to try and get a better angle on where this landing could have taken place. Yeah, thanks very much. Cheers. Sorry.
I think I found your discussion of the tides very interesting, and I mean, I think my writing goes back about 30 years since I read this text, but he fought the campaign against the Venetide before he goes to Britain, hasn't he? So I think in a way that is cumulative evidence for Caesar's consciousness of tidal waters. When you're ascribing him standing off from the coast like that, he must be working with complete knowledge of the tidal.
Absolutely.
That's knowledge you could have got from fishermen. I mean, fishermen from the other side of the channel would have been fishing there. You wouldn't even need reconnaissance for that. But it's just the very fact he's fought the Venetide, that a lot of description isn't there about how he has to learn to master the tides and to build ships appropriate. Just seems to me to work incredibly cumulatively with your point. That this thing already has admitted the tide is an essential factor.
That's right, yeah. He talks about the Venetti ships, so what he has to do in the Loire, he gets, I think, local craftsmen to help build warships to cope with the tides. But the other bit I would have got onto which I thought was quite interesting, was the rhetoric. Now, you've got the Veneti, they've called over auxiliaries from Britain. Okay, so I'm suggesting they swap hostages, which is what they do. You've got auxiliaries fighting anyway. I'm suggesting it's quite possible that those auxiliaries were seamen with ships from Britain, because in both of these landings, there's no mention of any ships challenging Caesar's ships. So maybe they all went to the Veneti area, the confederation that was fighting there, and they got defeated. So you've got Pythias, Posidonius, who had some knowledge. As you quite rightly say, you've got fishermen who'd either give it willingly, or Volosanus could have nabbed a few. He could have sailed next to them and taken them as prisoners. Alexander did it. He landed some marines. They weren't inland because he couldn't find pilots. They grabbed a few farmers, put them on a boat, and said, "You get us there, you'll get back. We don't get there, you're not going anywhere." Okay, so, yep.
Yeah, I don't think you need to go to Posidonius or people like that. I mean, that's his local knowledge.
I think you're right, but the build-up for what Caesar had, I mean, he caught everybody on those ships. He put the Senate to death, the Veneti's Senate. He had the rest left, and they were enslaved. Well, once you enslave somebody, you can do what you like with them. It seemed to be what the game was about. And some of those were experienced sailors who'd done that. So I think you're right. It was a very valid point. Thanks.
I think the thing about the tides as well, actually, the open monsoon channel will affect the tides. I mean, it was right up until the time of Henry VIII, the passage to France was through the Watson Channel. It wasn't around the North Foreland.
Yeah.
So the tides in these tide maps, I'm not entirely sure that those would strictly apply, and I don't know what. You know, if you're drawing this sort of map and you're trying to fit that map to time, distance, movements, you have to factor in the potential that the tides are ripping through the Watson Channel quite strongly in a way that...
Is that because the land masses are closer together?
Yeah, and something's kept that sea passage open for nearly 6,000 years before it fills in, probably because that Stonor bank is building southwards from Thanet. But that's only happening after 1580 something or other, and we don't quite know. So the whole thing has been kept open, at least in its central, and there's quite a coarse bottom to that channel.
Which makes the sea uneven.
Yeah, and there's a lot of gravel on the bottom. At the bottom of the Watson Channel, beneath all the marsh stuff that exists there at the present time, is a very coarse gravel full of marine shells indicating high energy flowing through there. I don't know whether anybody's done tidal modelling for the medieval period through there, but obviously, for whatever reason, it is easier to go through there rather than go around the North Foreland. So it may be suggesting that tides are pulling ships through there, or pushing ships to the north, or something like that. I'm sure somebody's written about it. I don't know what that literature is, but it would be, you know, you could improve that model immensely probably by looking at some of that sort of work.
Yeah, okay. You got any suggestions where to look?
I could try and find some. I'm not off the top of my head. I don't know, I'll think about it.
Okay. Would you have any idea?
Well, in some of the historic evidence, you'll find things like Harold Land's history of climate, and these are the ones where you also small cases, but McGrail's usually followed up this stuff, isn't it?
I think in the Watson, from my experience, that would be beyond McGrail's ability to do that.
Sure,
I mean, this is a sort of mathematical modelling exercise probably that somebody will have had to have done. And if it hasn't been done, it can be done, but it just requires someone who knows how to.
Also, you can find analogous channels as well. If you can find historic evidence of the width of the channels in comparable cases, there's funneling depth and width, you know, is modelable by comparison. You know. There's enough, as you say, if the wind blows one way and the tide goes one way, there are whole channels where it's much quicker to just put the boat on the tide, on the current,
Yeah.
than it is to sail it, you know.
Yeah.
You know, that's very common around the shores of Britain.
Okay, thanks very much. Anybody else?
I'm just not sure what the point of it was. You know, you're saying it's a success. So
Yeah.
why didn't he press his advantage? Why did he, you know, not wait for his chariots survive and really kind of do something? Why do you just
Okay, yeah, I mean, this is a moot point. And one of the things I've done is look at how he writes about things. Okay, we've had the Veneti talked about. The Veneti were the tribe at the head of a sort of maritime confederation that run the channel. And the year before, they were defeated at sea, yeah, where Caesar basically had to defeat them. So they were defeated. Okay, that's book 3, so that was 56 BC. Then what Caesar did, the next year, he's in Gaul, he's doing a bit of fighting in Gaul, but he goes across the Rhine to Germany for 18 days. They run away from him, they withdraw for him, waiting for him in this ground that he's not going to go into. So he burns a lot of houses, chops their corn down and comes back. So in those days, that was a bit of a way of saying, look, I've been here. It's very macho, I think. You get there and go, see, I'm in, what are you going to do? I'm going to burn all your crops? Come on then, I'm burning your crops, what are you going to do? Okay, don't do it again. Don't cross the Rhine. Leave the Ubii alone, they're my friends, whatever. And look at this bridge I built. I'm a dude, it was really cool. This bridge was a big deal. And what they did was they crossed over it and took so many foot off the other end and left it up. Because these guys didn't have any idea how to get to it and use it. Okay? So, what they're saying is this. Some people say, Alexander the Great went that way, he expanded the empire. So, this way a bit and that way a bit, mainly east. Pompey, who was working with Caesar, who later they fought each other in the Civil War, he'd done the same. He'd gone to the east and he'd done this. So some people think Caesar had to sort of say, I've got Gaul, I've gone a long way east, and I'm going to go a long way west. And I would add, I haven't seen anybody say it, he wanted to do it in the same consular year. So just have a nice sort of touch to it. That's what some people think. That he would have done that for the kudos and the I'm better than Pompey sort of approach. Suetonius says he went over there to get pearls, because he liked pearls. Okay, so he went over there to get pearls. I'm saying, my view is this, and I'm going to argue it, and I've got some, what I think is evidence. He took the Veneti and he won, but it's this thing about hostages and people from Britain. If the people from Britain said, here's our hostages as well as our forces, then the Veneti probably said, here's some hostages back. So he's got the Veneti, he's defeated them, but over in Britain, you've got maritime tribes, so people are used to the sea, with some Veneti hostages, which are probably reasonably high up, otherwise they're probably not worth having as hostages. So I think part of it may have been, he got over there to say to them, it's enough now, I've got Gaul, I can come and get you whenever I want. Stop messing around. Keep your hostages, send them back, but don't attack Gaul. It's not yours anymore. That would be one of the things. I think another thing as well is Crassus, he was with Pompey and Caesar. It was another triumvirate. Okay, so there was 3 of them running the show. His son was there, and he actually took Aquitaine, took it quite well, he did a good job. But Strabo tells us he actually jumped in a boat, sailed across to Britain, met the people in Cornwall who were doing the lead trade, told them how to go to the continent and what the trade routes were, and got back again. And some people say that's why the Veneti got upset. It's not because Caesar was charging around there doing all that stuff. They thought, hang on a minute, this guy's gone over them and he's taken our livelihood away. We're the ones who control the trade. Okay? So, it could be, because Crassus is very rarely mentioned, and I think that's grossly unfair, because everybody compares Caesar, he's doing this because of Pompey and all the rest of it. You know, it could have been Caesar decided to do it, to open up trade for Crassus. That's a possibility as well. But the raid, the punitive raid, you can get into quite a bit of depth about this. You can have persistent raiding strategies, which may actually be what he was going to do. You can have non-persistent raiding strategies. It was a way of weakening an enemy, but more than anything else, it was a way of causing political change. You didn't have to stay. You went there, you destroyed the cops, you killed everybody in the field, you went away again. So the people who did all the hard work are looking at this chieftain, one of the 4 maybe, and saying, you're not looking after us. That's not much good. You know, we'll get somebody who takes care of us. Political change, Caesar might have left them alone. That was one of the ways they did it. That's a recognised approach that people used. So, I don't know. The time he did it, he's talking about the autumnal equinox, when the seas become very dangerous to travel. He went over, I would suggest, as a raid, because he didn't take a lot of stores with him and a lot of other stuff with him. So the whole idea was to get there, stomp around a bit, just like he'd done in Germany. 18 days he spent there. Stomp around a bit, give him a message. I can get here whenever I want. I know where you live. Okay, and he got away. But he went back the next year with a lot more men. So, then, this is one of the reasons that you've hit on the point. This is one of the reasons why some people say it was a failure, because they're saying he actually planned to stay. I don't see it.